amigos y bienvenidos a este vuestro programa Dos gatos en tierra de perros. Un podcast de actualidad donde analizamos de manera fáctica y neutral las noticias más relevantes de la política y cultura norteamericana.
Hello, I'm Joe Magaja. Thank you, friends, for being with me for another episode of Dos Gatos en Tierra de Perros. Today, I have with me Mr. Mike Madrid. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe. Looking forward to this conversation.
Same here. It's been a really interesting time. As you know, Trump swore in yesterday as the new president, and this was a really interesting campaign for all sides because I think there was more of a focus on the Latin voter than any campaign that I can think of throughout my life. It seems like Latinos are getting more involved in the political process. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, I mean, just by sheer numbers, right? It's population growth. The whole country's changing. So there's more Latinos in everything and everywhere, just by math. Our turnout rate was actually lower than it was in 2020. But in terms of the raw vote, the actual number of voters, it's gone up. And we can expect that there will be a record number of Latino voters voting in every election cycle for the rest of our lives because the math is changing, the population is growing. So just sheer demographic change is driving it's forcing the hand of a lot of the conversations that I think we've wanted to have for many years, but we're never able to because we just weren't big enough for the population yet.
Yeah, and I mean that's a huge part of it, that basically, especially in the southern states, but throughout the country, Hispanic people are becoming the majority. If they're not already the majority, it's not really being reflected as much as it should be in Hollywood or in popular culture. But, you know, anybody that lives in California knows that the best food, the best everything is Hispanic, you know. So I figured sooner or later it's going to have to reflect, you know, and yeah, I think, like I was telling you off air, when I was young in California, all my Chicano friends were just kind of disinterested in politics. I would try to get them to talk about it, and they were just like, well, it's all BS, and we don't have any power. But now it seems like the younger generation is a lot more interested and a lot more involved. And in fact, a lot of Democrat pundits were kind of attacking Latino voters, saying that it was all misogyny and that was the reason they didn't vote for Kamala and things like that, which shows that they still don't really understand the people that they're trying to reach out to, I think. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I was very disappointed, maybe not as shocked, but very disappointed that a lot of Black leadership and a lot of white progressive leadership were just coming unglued at Latinos. And, you know, accusations of misogyny and sexism and racism. Never mind, Latinos, you know, voted for the highest turnout ever for Barack Obama, and second was Hillary Clinton. There's overwhelming evidence that none of this is true, but it just shows that on the progressive side that these lazy ethnic racist stereotypes exist as much as they do on the right. And it's unfortunate. It's sad, but like I said, I think this election exposed a lot of ugly undercurrents, certainly in the American right, but also in the American left, where the old rules don't apply anymore, and the challenges to power structures are becoming more real and uncomfortable. And like I said, I think that there's a real day of reckoning that's obviously hit the Democrats now. I think it will come for the Republicans too. In many ways, it has. But yeah, it was disappointing to see just the immediate knee-jerk racism from Black people, from white progressives, pulling these really ugly, ethnic, lazy stereotypes, none of which have any basis in reality, as an explanation for why Latinos were not smart enough to vote for us.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people they see things through the view of America, but really, if you go to Latin America, it's a very different view in terms of politics and tradition and beliefs. A lot of them are very strongly Catholic and conservative. But in this country, particularly second and third generation Chicanos and other descendants of Latinos from various countries, they're more integrated into the system, and they relate more to the brown and black causes. Whereas it seems like the folks that I've known from Latin America don't really necessarily relate or see themselves in that light as disenfranchised or as other than, I don't know, but that's, and they're coming.
They're not. I mean, they're not as much. I mean, you have to remember, being Latino, being Chicano, being Mexicano, whatever you are, however you define yourself, here in the US is literally a statement that I'm not of either place. So the word you're using is exactly right. It's a disenchantment. It's a disengagement. I'm not of this system. The system wasn't designed for me on either side, and I understand both, but I'm not fully of either. That's different than being, Mexican, or being Salvadorian, or being, Colombian, and being in those countries. There's certainly class problems in those countries. There's class problems here now. But they're not disengaged or disenfranchised because the system was not of them, for them, racially or ethnically. They're all entirely ensconced in it. Here, here, what the problem is, you have Chicanos, Latinos conflating alienation for oppression. That's been the biggest problem. And I'm not suggesting that there hasn't been a history of oppression. There clearly has. But it's not anything like what you've seen with Black Americans, for example. The challenge that Latinos face is alienation. It's the fact that the system, like you just put perfectly, Hollywood does not see us. Hollywood doesn't want to see us from a market perspective. They don't need to do Latino content or Latino stories because Latinos are going to show up to the movie theaters regardless. I mean, they're very explicit about that. We don't need to emphasize that. We don't need to talk about that. We don't need to lean into that. And so when culture doesn't reflect that, your politics don't reflect that. And that's what I think is really the difference, the differentiator here. But keep in mind, Latin America also has, and it's not fair to equate Latin American culture with Latino culture in the United States. They're two totally different things. But, a lot of people that want to say, and I hear this all the time, every day on social media, is, Latin people want a strong man. They're racist. They're Catholic, conservatives. Latin America is the region of the world that has had the most female heads of state than any other part of the world. We are a very maternal, female-oriented culture, very female-driven. This is not a paternalistic society at all. This is all female-driven. And anybody who understands Latino culture all knows it's about women head of household, women who drive our culture, women who drive oftentimes the economy, as was the case in my household. We look to women for leadership regularly, normally, quantifiably. It comes from our indigenous heritage. And so, the great irony of the moment is that in the United States is that the longer people are here in the United States generationally, the less Latin American they become, the more Americanized, the more Trumpy they become, the more they take on those characteristics. That's what I was trying to write in my book. It's like, look, guys, you want to say that this is about a caudillo or a strongman or Latin American culture. It's the exact opposite. At least get your stereotypes right. Like the biggest shift towards Trump was not recent migrants. It was not naturalized voters. It's second, third, fourth generation Latinos who don't speak Spanish, who don't identify with the mother country, who identify as America firsters. That's who's shifting to the right. So it's not the Latin American piece of us. It's the U.S. assimilated piece that's doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, again, the Hollywood stereotype is of one type of Latino, and they don't understand that Latino isn't a race. There are white Latinos, there are Asian Latinos, there are Black Latinos.
Yeah.
And they're all, because it's a culture. And
it's a mixed race culture.
Yes.
Latino by definition is multiracial. Like that's what it is. And that's what people don't, that's where Black America gets it wrong, candidly. Is Black America really wants us to fit into this non-white structure. And it's like, we're not that. We're white. We are racially white. Go in the US Census, Hispanics are white. Unless we're not, right? We're Black, Asian. Yes, those mixtures are there, but that's the confounding thing about the way the government tries to classify what this race, ethnicity, and culture is. And it can't be. And so there's some very legitimate arguments, Joe, that, and I know you've had many of them, which is, what is there such a thing as Latinidad? Is there such a thing? And I think we're going to come to the conclusion that there is both more of an understanding of what it is and less of an understanding of what it is as it becomes a bigger part of the American experience, because America's becoming, it's not just that we're becoming more Latino, which we are, it's that we're becoming more multiracial. Because Latinos are multiracial by definition. We're the first multiracial people. La raza cósmica, right? We're the clash of the old and the new world. We're both. Yeah. And so Black America isn't comfortable with that. And neither is white America. And in a country that has defined its racial experience through a black and white lens for 250 years, it challenges the power structures and the language and the relationship of race in America in a way that is very uncomfortable for them. We're comfortable with it. We do that walk every day. We know what it is. We know what it means to look white, to speak Spanish, to understand how to be more white or less white as a survival mechanism in whatever community, society, or room we're in. That's what we've had to learn. That's our magic power. That can be both a positive thing for America and it can be a negative thing for America. And we're going to learn that because that was never the black and white experience. Black America has been 11% of the population from 1920 till now, really since the end of the Civil War. We just didn't have good census records then, but there's never been a racial threat of Black people taking over white people. With Latinos and what's happening now, it's like, wait a second. They're not white, but they're not Black. But the only way we know how to talk about race is about Black and white. So this has to be bad. And we have interracial marriage rates over 50%. Not just with whites, by the way. We have highest interracial marriage rates with Blacks and with Asians. We sleep with everybody. We're a mix of everything. And as America becomes more mixed and multiracial, I think it changes. I wrote on my Substack, I wrote a piece on this on Martin Luther King's, holiday. It feels like we're farther away from Martin Luther King's dream of a colorblind society. I don't think we've ever been closer. We're getting there closer and closer literally every day.
Yeah, I agree. And I think eventually we will have a Hispanic president. Do you see any up and comers that might fit that bill?
I mean, look, Marco Rubio is our Secretary of State now. Mm-hmm. And I was a big Marco guy before the Trump era. I thought he had a keen understanding of a lot of this. Cuban, obviously, different experience than virtually every other Latino diaspora. But again, I think a talented politician, at least in the pre-Trump era. Ruben Gallego, I think, for the Democrats is really exciting to me. He's very moderate. Alex, my good friend Alex Padilla here in California, the Senate, is a good man. I think his politics are a little bit too left of the community. I think you're going to see him change in the coming years as the community changes. And that, I think, is the great hope is Latinos are the moderates in both parties. We're the moderate voices in both parties. And it's going to force a different dialogue in both parties. And that, I think that's the great promise of what Latinos are. It's why I titled my book, The Latino Century. I believe that that's the promise we have for repairing what ails this country, this polarization that is really driven by demographic change. We are the glue that can kind of pull it all back together. And I think we are. I don't think it looks like it at the moment, especially with the change in the administration. But the fact that we voted more for Trump, I think in the long run is going to be a healthier thing for the Republican Party. It's a healthier thing for the Democratic Party. It's a healthier thing for the country. Because the Democrats were never going to get their heads out of the sand until they got a wake-up call, and they got it.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of Hispanic people are working people and even impresarios, but they're focused on the economy. They're focused on prosperity. And we haven't had that, at least in the last 4 years. The economy's gone downhill. In terms of international wars and that kind of thing, there's probably a mixed bag. there are a lot of Hispanic people in the military, but at the same time, they don't want to die for oil or making somebody else rich off of their blood and suffering.
Yeah, the only reason that we're hitting recruitment numbers in our military is because Latinos are signing up and enlisting. If Latinos didn't have a higher rate than everybody else, the military enlistment numbers would be really, really bad. So yeah, and I'm not sure that the average enlisted man or woman, I mean, they certainly don't want to die for somebody else's pocketbook. That's absolutely true. But I don't think that, my cousins who all, enlisted, they weren't. My best friend Alex in high school became a Marine. They weren't thinking about like going to war and dying. They didn't see a whole lot of other options to help them out. They were thinking the best way I can help myself and my family is to go and join the military, learn a trade, learn some skills, maybe make a career out of it. Some of them did from high school. Some of my buddies are still in the military. Get the GI Bill, be able to go to college. They're thinking a little bit more day to day, hand to mouth, than they are thinking geopolitically, right? Enlisted guys are anyway. Maybe the officer corps, different. But the enlisted guys, he's basically that guy who's like, and women, but more men than women. Their decisions are basically like the construction worker, the other Latino construction worker who's got to make decisions day by day, week by week. Long term is a month. Long term is next, rent payday. We got to pay rent. That's long term. And so when you're thinking like that, you're not necessarily thinking about the bigger picture. And that's not a criticism. To me, that's cariño. That's my heart. Those are the people I love. Those are the people I grew up with. Those are the people that I fight for and am privileged enough to think for and help explain the world to both them, to the world, and the world to them, because they don't have an advocate. They don't have a voice. It's certainly not in the Republican or Democratic Party right now.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I have my Chicano cousin is ex-military as well. He taught at West Point. He was a captain in the Army. He was in Iraq. It's funny because I mean, most of my family, we're all mixed. We're a bit of everything, but most of them are very, very much on the left. And it's really been, I think, the change over the last few years that has opened a lot of people's eyes to, the intricacies of politics, where really the people at the top, whether they're on the left or the right, probably don't have your back necessarily, or, it depends on who you're talking about. But it's amazing how the internet has changed. And I think a lot of that has reached out to the Latin community as well, because now there are a lot more people on the internet, on YouTube, on Twitter, or X, and all the other platforms, and you can see it. And I think that might also be lifting up people in terms of getting more involved with everything, because you see things. I think that might be, and I don't know what your thought is on that, but the ban, or the proposed ban on TikTok, I think part of that was because so many of the videos of what was happening in Gaza came out on TikTok, with kids getting their heads blown off, just horrific things.
Yeah.
And that kind of got people worked up. And but you also see stuff like narco wars in Mexico, and there's all kinds of brutality that they'll show on there. They often pull it as soon as they find it, but the algorithm doesn't always catch that stuff right away. And that's another thing. I mean, Trump, he declared war on the narcos. I'm not sure how that's going to work, though. I mean, we're not going to send the military down to Mexico. What are your thoughts on that?
Who knows with this guy? What I'll say is this: I think it's going to be a real challenge for the Trump administration on two fronts. The first is going to be in the court of public opinion, which is where I think he's going to see the first slippage in his numbers, because people like the idea of a strong border and concept, but once you start ripping up families and start to see the actual economic impacts of a mass deportation, like, if you thought inflation was bad under Biden, good luck. You take 20 million low wage workers out of the service economy. Do you how devastating that will be to the price of goods and to the economy generally? You throw on a 25% tariff, which is, promised by February 1st on Mexico and Canada, signed the executive orders yesterday. I mean, you're talking massive inflation. You're talking massive economic shocks. And then the second is the actual practical ability of doing it is, this is the government's ability to round up millions of people. It sounds like, oh, of course they can do it. I mean, we can send them. I was going to say we can send a rocket ship to the moon, but we don't even do that anymore. We have to outsource that to Elon Musk, right? Like we don't even do that anymore. So good luck. Like you can't do that, both economically in the court of public opinion or logistically. Like they're talking about like what military bases can we put temporary housing on? It's like when people realize how much we're spending to lock up and deport people and break up families that were keeping the price of my housekeeping and my gardening and my latte and my car wash and everything down. A restaurant, you think restaurants are going to be able to function without a back office crew there? That's all Mexicano, it's all Latino, it's all, Guatemalans, Nicaraguans, Salvadoreños, Mexicanos. It's I mean, good. You're talking about a massive contraction in the economy. And like I said, I think he's going to do it until he starts to realize that people they're not going to put up with it. First of all, the pricing is bad, but the costs are bad, but there's going to be human stories too that people are not going to be tolerant of. And the real irony is immigration at this moment is lower today now after the Biden administration got its head out of the sand. It's lower today than it was at any point under the Trump administration. It's lower.
Mm-hmm.
So like what do we need more immigrants to make the economy work? What are you doing? And I think the public's going to get wise to it and start to see opposition start to build pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think there was a big reaction to the Venezuelans who came in en masse. A lot of them have filled up the hotel rooms in cities like New York. And I mean, some people are getting rich off of that because they're still getting paid, but they're getting paid by the federal government for that. A lot of some of those people, I don't know if it's a lot, but I don't know what the percentage is, but some of them are violent criminals. The Tren de Aragua gang has made a lot of news. And it kind of brings to mind the Marielitos back in the day when Jimmy Carter said, anybody that wants to come from Cuba, you're welcome to come. So Fidel said, okay, well, I'll just empty out all my jails. So here's all our murderers and rapists, enjoy. And there was a crime spree after that. And it seems like there's been a rise in crime in the major cities, but I don't think it's just because of that. I think it's also because of the local economies and the fact that everybody's struggling and that the homeless population has gone up. But a lot of people are blaming it on them. And I'm wondering, I think they'll probably start the deportations with them because also that would be a way to cut off the funds to, feeding them, housing them, giving them cell phones. They were getting, I think, some kind of card that they could use pretty much anywhere. And that infuriated a lot of people, including Latinos, who struggle every day and have been fighting every day trying to get, citizenship as well. And it feels like a lot of people just kind of cut in line ahead of them. Well, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, all of that. I think that's probably blown out of proportion. I think it's as simple as just people are not happy with high levels of undocumented people coming across the border, as they should be. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing racist about that. The problem is both parties have been so complicit in this for so long that they don't have the legitimacy of pointing the finger at the other. Republicans have wanted a broken immigration system because they want a boogeyman. They want this scenario. It helps them win elections like it just did. This is what they want. The Democrats always thought Latinos forever were going to vote on immigration. And as long as the Republicans were being racist and overplaying their hands, they could turn Latino voters out. One of the reasons, why I wrote my book was to say that's not happening. It's never been true. But as the biggest growth in the Latino population is second and third generation, it's really not true now. Latinos want more border security, not, this craziness that you guys talked Biden into to just allow people to kind of come in. It's just absurd. And shame on him, shame on them, shame on the nonprofits and the immigrant advocacy groups that knew this, could have cut a deal years ago, but wouldn't because they were getting money for it and invitations to the White House Christmas party and all of that nonsense. It's just they're hurting now the same immigrants that they claimed to protect and were fighting for. So it's an indictment on the whole, gross special interest system on both sides. Democrats especially, not just including, especially the Democrats are playing a dirtier, nastier, uglier game of dishonesty when they could have solved this problem a long time ago. And they didn't. They didn't. In fact, they made it worse. And as a result, you piss off the American public, you piss off Latinos, you piss everybody off in the process by being too cute by half. And you keep trying to characterize Latinos as, only, all of us, some of us whose families have been here for hundreds of years, waking up in the middle of the night, worried about ICE. I get every day, I get people on social media telling me, you're going to get deported, they're going to come and deport you and your families. And it's like, go to hell. My family's been here longer than your family's been here longer than Donald Trump's family. Like, what are you talking about? So, I just, there's both, like I said, both parties are just consumed by their own bias, by their own propaganda, and that's really what it is. Both parties are just completely consumed in propaganda. The right is far more dangerous. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to equate them, but the Democrats are very complicit in the same thing, and that's why they're losing public support. And the thing is, you can tell by how lost down the rabbit hole people are when they're just so shocked that people can have a different opinion than theirs. And that's what I was saying, like, especially with Black people and white progressives, shocked that that Latinos would vote for a Republican. It's like, how much in the bubble are you where you're just unable to see reality walking down the street every day? Like, you're so consumed by watching left-wing media that you just don't have a grasp on reality. Like, people are not okay. This economy is not okay. People are suffering. And you can paper over as much as you want, but that's not helping people pay the rent. Yeah, and one of the great ironies, Joe, sorry to keep going on, but obviously I spent a lot of time researching this. I did a poll after the election amongst Latinos in California. It's really fascinating because they were saying, the economy has been the top issue for 30 years for Latinos. It's always the top issue. But you never hear that coming from either party, the Latino economic agenda. It's always about immigration. And what was ironic was the issue was affordability. It wasn't job opportunities. In fact, that was the lowest because everybody has a job. Everybody who wants a job has a job. The problem is that job doesn't pay for anything. You need 2 or 3 jobs. So the problem isn't a job. The problem is affordability. And neither party, the Republicans did a better job simply because they were running against the incumbent. But the Democrats had really no understanding, and they just keep saying, well, the S&P 500 is doing great. Look at the stock market is doing great. They're doing everything that the Republicans criticized them for. Oh, the price of eggs, making fun of the price of eggs. Price of eggs voters. Price of eggs in California is $9 a dozen. An egg is about $1 now. Like, what do you...
Yeah, it's crazy.
Anyway.
Yeah, and gas too. And I mean, basically, I think that's how they really underestimated the voters in this country is the folks on the coast, on West Coast and the East Coast, think that everybody in the entire country thinks the way they do, right. And they don't take into account these quote unquote flyover states, which now have plenty of Latinos in them as well. And those states feel underrepresented, looked down on. And also they're struggling in their own ways. But yeah, rich people, it always cracks me up when they say, I mean, I saw people on Facebook saying things like, I'm willing to pay $5 more for gas, just to keep things the way they are, because we don't want to end democracy. And everything got so blown out of proportion. And then, once the election was over, all of a sudden people are cozying up to Trump. I thought he was the devil. I thought he was Hitler. And then he's sitting next to Obama at Jimmy Carter's funeral, and they're making jokes together. You don't do that with Hitler, or maybe you do if
Yeah.
yeah. So it's crazy.
Yeah, our political system is deeply flawed and broken. Like I said, I'm not making excuses. I'm not making false equivalencies, but there's a time for deep self-reflection at this moment. I think we're on one of the cusp of some very difficult times during the Trump era. But one thing I do know is that the status quo was not acceptable. It wasn't. And the Democrats have decided, I think honorably, that they're going to be the defender of American institutions. I get that. But you can't defend something that is falling apart. You have to have a vision for a better future. And if you don't, and you're going to defend it, then all you have to do is the easiest way to beat you is to just have people run against you. They don't have to have their own vision. Trump didn't have to have a vision. He just had to say these guys screwed it up. And that was what the race came down to, was the Democrats were defending a lot of things that were just not defensible. And explaining it away in their own little bubbles. And look, the race was close. It wasn't this big blowout and mandate. It was a close election. We have a way of our electoral college system, the way it's skewed, that it looks like it's a big, massive electoral college win. But the truth of the matter is, this was a closer election than people credit it for, especially Trump. And so, places like California have to really get their act together. It's like, if you can't just be resisting a resistor and call Trump names. Like, you have to actually have solutions and ideas. Otherwise, this doesn't work.
Yeah, and I like what you said about affordability. Most young people can't afford a house these days. A young couple, most houses in LA are $1 million and up. Hopefully that's going to change. We just went through these massive fires in which a lot of people lost their homes, and I know that they've suspended the requirements to rebuild, because they were making it so difficult to rebuild, and it almost seemed like it was going to be a land grab similar to Hawaii, where ultimately, some company possibly from abroad is going to buy up the property at pennies on the dollar and then make all these condos or different things. How do you think California is going to rebuild? And of course, that's going to need the help of a lot of Latinos in construction, among other things. Yeah.
Look, these moments, like elections, these big tragic moments, have the tendency to peel things back and make us look at things that we wouldn't otherwise look at. And you named a few of them. The first is, why are we now able to expedite the building permit process and the waiver of CEQA and Coastal Commission regulations when rich people are losing their second and third homes, when we weren't able to do that for poor and working class people, for Black and brown folks on the inland for the last 20 years? Like, we've needed that relief. We need to help that crisis. Why is that not why is it a big issue now? I understand, and I'm empathetic for people who lost their homes, but I've been empathetic for 15, 20 years and saying publicly, we need to waive these building requirements. You need to start permitting housing to allow people to get off the streets out of 4 or 5 families in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, because California's out of control. You're not building anything. Build. And so, like I said, it's unfortunate, but it's overdue to have this discussion. I think the word itself, rebuild, presumes that we should just kind of go back and put back homes up the way that they were. I'm not sure that that's true. I'm not saying we should condominiumize or make apartments or leave it open space. I don't know what we should do, but I think we need to stop and have a discussion and say, why are we building? Why are we allowing people to continue to build in these areas? When I was a kid, I grew up in Ventura County. There's always the Malibu wildfires followed by the Malibu mudslides. And there would always be a bailout for these really wealthy people. Always. Every year. You either got a big check from the state and feds for the fires, or you got a big check from the state and the feds for the landslides. Sometimes both. And it's every year. And it's like, at a certain point, Why is the government subsidizing really rich people to live in these areas when we're not spending that same amount of per family per person on people who actually need housing? And we all know the answer to why. But the idea of just rebuilding, I think, is we've got to be careful when we say rebuild, because even though we do need to do something, we need to reimagine what a new system looks like now that it's blank canvas, unfortunately and fortunately, because the system was not working. It was not working. We know we don't have the water infrastructure.
Yes. Yeah,
We don't have the water infrastructure to save those homes. This is not going to be the last 100 mile per hour wind hurricane of fires. This is the new normal. Like, that's going to be frequent. So we know that whether the reservoirs are full or not, which is a problem in California because they are over capacity right now, but that's very, very rare. It's like once in a 30-year event. Even though we did have water, we didn't have the fire hydrant capacity, because no fire hydrant capacity built anywhere in the country has the ability to put out a whole city the size of LA on fire. Of course they ran out of water. There's no water pressure. You can't move that much water that fast. It's like turning the city of LA into a water fountain. You literally can't do it. We don't have the human technology to do it. So people going, oh, they ran out of water. It's like, yeah, but not for the reasons you're talking about. So, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a problem we have to address, but you can't blame the government for that. There's plenty to blame the government for, don't get me wrong. But this has really exposed both the disinformation on the right and the incompetence on the left. And they're both responsible. I'm not going to get into a debate about who's more responsible. I think that the immediate action of the president and people like Elon Musk to attack people at their most, vulnerable moments is inhumane. It's very poor leadership. It's disgusting, frankly. So I'm not going to defend that, but I'm also not going to defend the way I saw the mayor and the governor respond. Because they just did not, it was not handled well at all. And so there's going to have to be a new understanding of doing things differently, because this just isn't working.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Do you think that Governor Newsom has a future, or a lot of people are saying that he's done after this, but then there are a lot of people that still kind of idolize him. I don't know. It's a complicated issue, but he's so much dug into the woke philosophy, and but he gives excuses anytime anything happens. And there are things like the high speed rail that still hasn't really gotten anywhere.
It's such a good example. The high speed rail, I think even Democrats are kind of like, we spent $11 billion on that at a time when we can't house people. Like, what's our priority here? We're getting things backwards. The economic development, and deployment department that was kicking out hundreds of millions of dollars of faulty checks during COVID that has never been accounted for. Just scam operations, gangs were just pulling money out. Like homelessness, we see it every day.
There's been so much money dumped into homelessness too. Where has that gone?
It's just, where's it gone? And I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into this, and it's literally, the situation's gotten worse. So government is proving it doesn't work. Like, it's showing us every day. And I think that's a really significant factor as to why Democrats defending institutions is, like I said, while it's virtuous and honorable and probably the right thing to do, it's extremely difficult politically to take that position, because you're constantly explaining and using the incompetence and the fecklessness of one area, and there are many, many examples, we just named 5, to defend something like the fires. People already are predisposed to not believe you for good reason. There's plenty of reason to not believe that government has its acts together. It doesn't. And that doesn't mean that government doesn't do good things. Of course it does. But there are too many growing examples of things that don't work. where people are not giving politicians the benefit of the doubt anymore. And so the solution for Democrats is not to protect these systems, it's to literally attack them, to go and say there is something wrong with the way we've been paying for homelessness. There's something wrong with CEQA. There's something wrong with the Coastal Commission. There's something wrong with these things. To keep trying to defend the indefensible means you're going to keep losing. You need to start justifying your values as a politician through a lens of what works. If I was a Democrat in California, I'd be pissed. I believe government is a good thing. I believe if I'm a Democrat, I believe that government can improve people's lives. Mm-hmm. But when I see all of these examples of waste and abuse and inefficiency and incompetence, I would be pissed because you're undermining our argument, let alone the human toll that it all takes. Do we really believe our schools can't get better for the money that we're paying for them? Like, do we really? Who believes that? That's absurd, right? High-speed rail is just, I get it. I get the grandiose vision and notion of it. It is so much money that train, for what the amount of money we're investing, we could have built so much housing to address so many of these problems, just straight paying for it. Yeah. The Economic Development Department, the fires, homelessness, on and on and on and on and on. DMV, just keep going. It's just bad. And at a certain point, like I said, it's not an anti-government attack. It's a pro need for a different understanding of institutions.
Yeah, and I think they're cutting a lot of agencies. They've got the Doge now, that's basically a department that's working themselves out of a job because their whole thing is to try and make things more efficient, and then they'll be gone. And from what I understand, most of them or all of them are working without a paycheck voluntarily. But yeah, there's a lot of waste, and in California we pay such high taxes, and so many people are moving out of the state because of that. For the first time in 100 years, we're losing people and companies. I'm wondering if maybe there's going to be some resolutions to the tax problem, and the fact that I was always like I'm happy to pay taxes, but where's the bang for the buck? You pay a lot of taxes in Europe, but you get universal health care. You're taken care of a lot more. Here we still have potholes, we still have our streets filled with homeless people, we still have fires and different things that destroy lives. And where is our money going?
You just nailed it. Is people don't believe California is working. They don't believe that it's because it's not. It's not. In a one-party state, we've been believing this, even though our eyes have been showing us something different every day. We're still giving the Democrats the benefit of the doubt. That's not happening anymore. You saw that with this change in the election in 2024. The gap narrowed. Kamala Harris, favorite daughter of California, she's a Californian, had a very weak showing in California, relatively anyway. It wasn't like she was going to lose to Trump, but my God, she should have, crushed it. Didn't do well. These are all signs that that people are changing. They've just had it. They're not buying it anymore, and I think there's a real appetite for a different type of message and a different type of messenger in democratic politics, where somebody can come in and say, look, this isn't working. My strong sense is you have to tie that with the belief or tie that to the values that Democrats still hold very dear. I think that Democrats genuinely want to do the right thing. I think that they genuinely want to help the least among us. I'm disheartened by the fact that they haven't held their party accountable for 15, 20 years when that hasn't been happening in places like California. But at the same time, I think that the alternative, the Republicans, have been far, far worse. And so, they put up with it for a while, but now they're not putting up with it. Now they're just saying, I'd rather go with those guys than continue. I know what I'm getting with you, which is just going to keep getting worse. So at least I might as well roll the dice here and take a chance because this isn't working.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, Mike. Where can people find you on the internet, and where can they find your books as well?
Well, I write regularly on all of these topics on Substack. My newsletter is called The Great Transformation, and I write about all of these topics on a daily basis, or at least a weekly. I write 4 or 5 times a week. So subscribe to that newsletter; it's free. And my book is available there also. The book is called The Latino Century. It was published by Simon and Schuster. It's available on Amazon or at Barnes and Noble or wherever you get your books. And I think you'll enjoy the read. I think it's informative, and a lot of people are saying you predicted everything exactly the way it was going to happen. I didn't write it as a prediction; it was more of a warning. But everything that I was pointing out, in fact, did lead to what I was warning about. Like this is going to happen if you don't make these changes. The changes weren't made. This is what happened. So, thank you, Joe, for the time. It's been a great conversation.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. And I definitely would love to have you back. I've been having panel discussions lately, more in Spanish than in English, but I'm mixing it with Spanish and English. I started with a co-host who has kind of dropped out, which is why we were Dos Gatos en Tierra de Perros. I'm going to try and transition to Un Gato en Tierra de Perros and see how that goes.
A tougher fight. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Unless I can find another gato, but yeah, we'll see what happens. But I appreciate you so much, and thank you to all our listeners. And until next time.